Thank you everybody for coming to our 5th Hammer Show. Today we have on our panel a few of our candidates who have some experience in the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is security and geopolitics. Over here we have Eileen, Kenneth, Sufyan, and Andre. So thank you for joining us today. Today, thought I'll just start with Eileen. Eileen, you have had a front row seat in some of the biggest happenings that have been going on in the world. That you managed to get a scholarship, a government scholarship, and study in Peking University as well as Yonsei University in Korea. What have those experiences taught you, and how does that relate to how Singaporeans see the world?
So I think, for those who don't know, I studied in China and then in Korea, and I also spent 3 years working in China. So in total, I spent about almost 10 years, close to 10 years living in East Asia. So I think my biggest takeaway is really that the importance of taking time to understand different cultures and communities, and one of the best ways to do it is really to immerse yourself there. So I know that maybe my choice of country of study, etc., has been a little bit more unconventional, but I do feel like it has paid off. So I do feel that for Singapore, it's really important for Singaporeans to go off the beaten path and to venture into places that you're interested in.
Yeah. Why did you choose China and not some other country? A lot of people like to go to the US, to the UK and Australia. Why China?
China, funnily enough, it was because when I was applying for a scholarship on my interview panel, because I actually applied to colleges in the US and the UK. I think most of us did at this point, right? My fellow 92ers. Yeah, so actually the question was posed to me because I applied to an East Asian Studies course, I believe in the US. And on the interview panel, the question was, why do you want to go halfway across the world to study, about this part of the world? And to be really honest, at the age of 18, I did not have a good answer. So I was like, oh yeah. So I was just asked whether I'll be open to consider studying in East Asia instead, since I had an interest in the region. And so I said yes. And that's how I ended up in China.
But after China, after you did your undergrad in China, you went to Korea to do your master's. Yeah. Why Korea then?
Why Korea? Because I think one, my interest in the language was definitely one. But I think two, when we talk about East Asia, some of the bigger players, right? Oftentimes when we talk about East Asia, we think about US-China, rivalry and how it's going to play out for our region. But we also sometimes forget that there are also US allies in the region that also are part of the regional security architecture that contributes, right, to kind of how it plays out. So Korea is one of the US allies in the region, and that's kind of why I decided to go there. I thought it'd be very relevant for the job that I'll be taking out MFA after.
Very interesting. So you were a diplomat in MFA for almost 7 years? And which postings did you go to?
So I was posted to, in headquarters, everyone starts out in headquarters. So I started on China desk, surprise, surprise, because of my background studying in China. Then after that, I covered Singapore's bilateral ties with Thailand, Philippines, and Laos. And I think during that time, it was also Singapore's ASEAN chairmanship in 2018. So I also kind of got a front row seat to looking at how ASEAN works, and Singapore as host. There are over 1,000 ASEAN meetings in one calendar year, so we were kept very, very busy as a small ministry. Then after that, I served a 3-year posting in Beijing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah.
Okay, and let's move on to Kenneth. Kenneth, you are actually a Lieutenant Colonel, and NS Lieutenant Colonel. That's really impressive. I think you are a rover, what's called a rover, which means that, in other words, you're a Xiao-on soldier who wants to sign on and continue on, not sign on, but you continue on volunteering in the SAF even though you don't need to. Why did you choose that path?
I think it's not Xiao-on. I think it's called Lao Ping nowadays. At this age and you're still serving NS, you call Lao Ping, not Xiao-on. I think that when I was younger, I didn't thought that this journey would be so long. Because at that point of time, we really just want to serve for 2.5 years, finish your cycle and just move on. But as you progress and then you understand why do we actually need to have a strong defense, given the fact that we were one colonized in the past, and when in the 1950s, 1960s, the British decided to pull out, we have nothing to defend ourselves. And with that, we started to build our own force at that point of time. And then after that, it started to grow. And over time, when we interacted with the people in NS as well, then we realized that actually there's a lot of strength in a group of people working together for the defense of Singapore. And I think that everyone started to influence each other as well. And I think from NS experience itself, I think there was a lot of skills, knowledge, experience that we had over time. Things like commanding experience, leadership, teamwork, and stuff like that. All these are very important soft skills that I think that if we can do a positive transference to the day-to-day work itself, actually these are very good things that can be brought to the daily work that we do as well. So that's why I actually enjoy the experience of NS.
You mentioned about transferring some of the skills you learned in the military into your civilian life. Do you think there is a sufficiently structured way in which we are doing that in the SAF? Or do you think it's some soldiers get that, some soldiers don't, and then not everybody benefits from it?
I think that's a good question. If I'm not wrong nowadays, there are a little bit more joint collaborations or MOU with some of the schools to do this. It could have been a little bit more structured because I realized that there are a lot of skills that we learn in the NS itself. Maybe creative thinking. Nowadays there's creative thinking. Nowadays there's leadership and stuff like that as well. If they can structure it into like a certified course, when people are going through NS, they 2 years NS itself, and it's taken as part of the training itself. And eventually these certs can be used for their future job search. That would be something that is very useful.
Yeah. That's like the micro-credentialing that we see a lot nowadays.
Yeah.
So it makes NS something that helps the NS men beyond just defending the country, but it also helps them in their future careers.
Exactly. And these are very relevant skills. In fact, I find that these are synonymous with whatever things that we're doing outside as well. Yeah.
And that's exactly right. We should make NS something that's mutually beneficial to both the nation and the soldier as well, right? And we have something of value that you can take out to the working world from our experience.
Exactly.
Sufyan, you are a lawyer.
Yes.
Why did you choose that path?
Whether it was incidental, I've always had a law-centric path. I served my NS in the police force and then went on to university and then came back with a law degree. There wasn't a fixed ambition to become a lawyer when I was young. In fact, I wanted to be many things. I wanted to be a submariner, I wanted to be a pilot. Yeah. So I think I focused myself at some point after while serving my NS, and then we had to do a little bit of legal studies as well as a police officer, and then as a Coast Guard officer, which was the vocation I was in. I think that piqued a little bit of interest in me in terms of going on to read law after. So that was, I would think, when I finally figured out that I wanted to be a lawyer.
You've been a lawyer for how long already?
4 years this year.
Yeah. Yes, okay. Andre, you've got some quite varied experience. You are also a lawyer, trained as a lawyer, but you're not practicing as a lawyer now.
Yes.
In fact, you were a consultant with Boston Consulting Group, BCG, quite recently. What accounts for that transition, or do you plan to go back to law in the future as well?
I think that is a very easy answer to the last question, no. But
Why not?
I think, like for you, some people it's a calling.
Was it? Okay.
For me, not so much. But I think, notwithstanding that practicing law is not for me, right? I think legal training and having a legally trained mind has really helped me in the rest of my career, right? It really focuses your mind, makes you think about complex issues in a very specific and targeted way. I think the skills I've taken from the law have continued through the rest of my career. But to your question, Gerald, I think it's really just I don't think at any one point in my career where I took certain steps, I was thinking too far ahead. It was really just feeling comfortable to experiment. And then each step was kind of a half step, It wasn't a full leap every time, right? I moved from law to legal tech. Then from there, I was already in a startup space, so I moved around in startups for a bit. And then after business school, I used my startup experience to go to Amazon Web Services to sell cloud services to startups. And then after that, leveraging this collective package, then I went to BCG as someone who has experience across industries to advise companies on their, future forward-looking transformations and everything. So yeah, in many ways, each step of my career kind of ties back to the last. And if you think about it as a whole package, it kind of makes sense. But I think for someone looking outside in, it's certainly very varied indeed.
Well, I mean, a lot of politicians somehow are lawyers. I'm not sure why. I'm not one of them. I'm an engineer by training, but the two of you are lawyers. So how do you think that legal training would be able to blend in with what you plan to do if you get elected?
Yeah, so I mean, if we want to bring us back to the topic at hand today, right, geopolitics and security, I think where this really holds true for Singapore and where it's really relevant to us is we are a small nation. We have barely any strategic depth. We can walk from one end of Singapore to the other within a day. There's no strategic depth for us to speak of, right? And I think Kenneth can surely attest to this as a self-on soldier.
Lao Ping.
So we really rely on international legal systems that are functioning, that countries adhere to guarantee our survival. Of course, we cannot be solely reliant on it. We need to have a strong defense as well as a strong deterrent. But in many ways, that is the last resort, right? We want to collaborate and work with our neighbours first and foremost before we have to pull out the big guns, so to speak. So that's why I think we as lawyers, especially I did public international law back in university, these are issues that really are super relevant to Singapore today, especially in the world and its turbulent times that we have today.
So you talked about the twin interest or the twin kind of skills or abilities that we must have about having a hard defense, but also diplomacy. A lot of people feel that foreign affairs is something that ministers talk about, it's something that diplomats talk about, academics. But the everyday person doesn't always feel that they are part of that conversation. How can we bring that conversation into the public realm?
I think that's a really good point, Gerald, because even for myself, having served as a former diplomat, right, and I studied international relations in school for my undergrad and from grad school, and even after coming home to serve as a diplomat, I still haven't found a good way to explain to my family, what is it exactly a diplomat does, why is foreign policy, very relevant to them. My grandma always wonders, like, if you study international politics, how come you're not in politics? But well, grandma, here I am.
So you just answered the question.
But on foreign policy, I think the average Singaporean feels like it's several steps removed away from their day-to-day life, right? Quite distant. I think oftentimes it's also because they associate foreign policy with politics. So they're like, I got no interest. I barely have any interest in our local politics, let alone, what's happening around the world, right? But I think the after 6.5 years at MFA, I think what I've condensed it into is really foreign policy goes beyond politics. It's also about economics. It's also about law, as Andre said. It's about defense. It's also about people-to-people ties, right? So when we talk about economics, I'm sure we talk about multilateral, bilateral free trade agreements. Why Singapore thinks it's important to be a part of these frameworks, right? Given the fact that we are small and we have a very open economy and we're reliant on flourishing economic ties with other partners. But at the same time, when it comes to people ties, right, cultural exchanges, for young people I think in schools nowadays, oftentimes the kids will go on school trips, right, to Southeast Asian countries or even to beyond, like to India, etc. All of this is really to build up this people-to-people relations and to forge deeper understanding of each other's countries. And I think more practically, I'm sure all of us have traveled overseas in the past. Has any of you e-registered with MFA?
I have.
Yes.
Right? There we go. Okay. Yeah, so the whole point of e-registering, why I raise this is because very practically, having good ties with these countries and establishing diplomatic presence there allows us to be in a better position, right, to offer help to Singaporeans when they're overseas and they're in need of assistance.
Not everybody thinks about going to our regional countries for trips. I remember one of my most memorable family holidays was actually a driving trip up to Malaysia. We just drove up and we spent basically 2 weeks on the road, going to different parts of Malaysia and seeing the different parts and some of the a bit off the beaten track areas of Malaysia.
So do you get all the way to the border?
I didn't go all the way to the border, but it was interesting enough, and I definitely is something that I would recommend to many of our fellow Singaporeans to try out our region. What do you think there's enough opportunities, or do you think there's enough encouragement for Singaporeans to find out a bit more about our neighbours, get to know their cultures, get to know their languages even?
Well, I mean, I want to pick up on the point you said about you enjoying your trip up north to Malaysia, right? And I think that really reinforces Eileen's point about the importance of good neighbourly relations. If we are on good terms with our neighbours and we see them as really our friends and brethren, then the whole of Malaysia is our hinterland as well, right? It's our extended friendly neighbourhood that we can rely on in times of crisis. In these times where the global order might be breaking down a little bit or reforming a little, we really should look to those who are closest to us, both physically and culturally as well, and form stronger ties as a collective ASEAN community.
From the defense point of view, we have seen that there are many bilateral exercises or even multilateral exercises that happens in the region, ASEAN as well. So that's where different defense ministries, the army, air force come together and actually run these exercises together. That's one form of the diplomacy between the different countries in terms of the forces. But I also think that on the other end, the other thing about diplomacy and defense is also there's two Chinese phrases that comes to mind. Firstly is 居安思危. The other one that has been often used is 弱国无外交. The first thing is that if you don't have a strong defense in the first place, don't talk about diplomacy, because people look at you and say that, just look at other countries, for example, Kuwait, it happened to them, Ukraine, it happened to them as well. So you got to build your own capabilities first, and then at the same time grow the diplomacy. That's where the security part will come in as well.
The aspect of working bilaterally closely with all our neighbours and even multilaterally also speaks to the fact that when we have security challenges together, then we have our agencies working with their agencies to retrieve certain persons and certain so I think this speaks well in terms of how we work well, how we should be working well with neighbours.
For instance, like with the US terrorist situation, and rather than negotiating as an individual country, ASEAN being able to do that together as a bloc, right? And we are all that much stronger for it. There are many of our Southeast Asian friends who live and work in Singapore, right? Alongside us in different professions. Like for instance, where I work in the philanthropy sector, I would say actually majority of my colleagues are from around the region, and that's really helpful when our work is focused on Southeast Asia. Everyone brings a bit to the table, right? My Indonesian colleague speaks like Bahasa Indonesia fluently. My colleague from Myanmar is able to give us a better sense of how do we, navigate the situation within the country, right? And then my colleague from Malaysia, who also went to school here in Singapore and is now working in Singapore, he gives us a very good sense, especially in parts of Malaysia that we're less familiar with, like Sabah and Sarawak, for instance.
One topic that has concerned a lot of Singaporeans is the Israel-Palestine conflict. How can Singapore be able to take a position that is in our national interest vis-a-vis this issue? I'm wondering, Eileen, whether you have any thoughts on this.
It's a big question. I think for Singapore, I think you made a really good point about how, for Singapore, can we engage in conversation in order to be able to land on a position that I think is satisfactory and that represents the interest of our country. There are segments of the population that feel very strongly about this, the ongoing conflict, right? Especially the humanitarian aspect of it. And I do believe that Singaporeans are capable of sitting down and having complex but open conversations, just like what we're having now, right? And it's an opportunity to get to know each other's perspectives better, and an opportunity for introspection, which will hopefully, right, then lead us to a place where we are formulating a position which factors in everybody's viewpoints.
There's a lot of tension now between the great powers, the US and China, and some countries are being forced to take sides. Singapore is not is one of those who has chosen to take a balanced approach to these conflicts and to these different pressures that are being pulled. Does our population is it aware about such things going on, and do you think we could do more to educate them?
Ironically, I actually think that Singaporeans now more than ever, with access to social media and everything, they're getting a lot of information, and a lot more Singaporeans than you would expect are tuned into these issues, but perhaps with polarizing perspectives on both sides, right? So I think, ironically, yeah, like I said, people are aware of these things, but maybe there needs to be room for a Singaporean perspective on it. And what better way to do that than to open up the room for debate and having a national conversation? Like, especially when you're talking about, for example, the South China Sea tensions, right? We may not directly have any claims on any parcels of land within the South China Sea, but our immediate neighbours do. All of them do. And if any tensions flare up in that region, it's going to impact Singapore because we are a seafaring nation, we are a maritime nation, we are a trading nation. And even if you think about our modern digital economy, we are the data center hub for the whole of Southeast Asia. All of the submarine cables in the region, or the vast majority of them, the major ones that connect to the rest of the world, terminate here in Singapore and then branch out to the rest of the region, right? So if tensions flare up, where do these cables lie? They lie in the South China Sea, a lot of them, especially the ones to the west coast of the US. And it threatens our the very basis of our modern economy.
So if these cables were somehow cut,
Yeah,
that would affect us.
exactly. Imagine our banking system grinding to a halt overnight. We are a wealth management hub, right? And even if you think about our manufacturing sector, now there's talk of us piping power over from Australia as well. That cable could be cut, and then where does that leave us, right? Yeah.
So do you think that we should do more to defend some of these undersea cables?
For sure. I think the Singapore Navy, as far as I'm aware, really taking strategic steps in that direction. But I think we also can do more and think further afield, and then also really educate the rest of Singaporeans at large, right, about these risks and make them aware of these threats so that it's part of our national conversation.
I think it really boils back to that first, I think one of the earlier questions that we talked about, which is, foreign policy and why is it relevant to Singaporeans in our everyday lives, right? We don't really think about this. Everyone thinks that it's just about, US-China rivalry and politics and making representations, but they are very real and practical and, crucial to our survival.
I mean, another area where we have a sort of captured audience is during NS. Soldiers have to go through different training, and that's one opportunity in which we can be educating them on our strategic interests as well.
Yes, correct. Yeah, but of course, sometimes soldiers being just enlisted, things are very green to them and stuff like that. Maybe just along the way, when they have a little bit more in-depth understanding, that's where all these can be filtered in slowly. So when they get a better understanding, it also then helps them to understand why do they actually need to serve NS. And these are all the reasons why.
And then speaking as a NSF or former NSF myself, right? I feel like those of you can corroborate this. When we are serving NS, it is when we are sitting in our bunk doing nothing that we feel the most why am I wasting my time? But when you're actually doing something and you feel purpose and you feel like you are contributing in some way, like that thought doesn't sit in your mind at all. Like you're serving the nation and you're really in whatever way you can and being useful, as opposed to like sitting in your bunk waiting for inspection or something like that.
So you should have less downtime in your bunk.
I'm quite sure there's not a lot of downtime in the bunk nowadays.
I'm not sure.
They're shorter the NS from 2.5 years to 2 years. Now everything is packed to 2 years.
I'm sure that will be a popular view. But
But speaking of NS, there have been some discussions, including in Parliament, about the NS pay and whether or not that's sufficient to reflect the kind of sacrifices that they make. Kenneth, what do you think? Are we on par on that area, or do you think we should?
What was your pay when you started NS?
I seriously
As
can't
a
remember,
Laoping.
but maybe as a recruit, it was like $300 about there. So yeah, so
I think mine was $250. I think we're the
about
same.
that, about the same. So I think there are two things about it. Maybe from the NSF point of view itself, is because these are boys who are 17 or 18 years old, just fresh out of JC or maybe poly, and then they got enlisted into the armed forces, and eventually after 1 or 2 years of training, may become a officer, or maybe you become a spec, so specialist in that sense. So you are actually holding some kind of command positions, responsibilities as well. So there are things that you need to be responsible. If anything goes wrong, you hold the same responsibility as a full-time serviceman as well. So I think in that aspect itself, I think they deserve the kind of respect by doing that at a particular age. And I think that we should give them a fair and equitable compensation in a way for sacrificing their time 2 years to serve the nation. So I think one of the proposals that we have is actually to look at the salary to be, currently it's called an allowance. So we have proposed for it to be called salary. So with the salary also comes with a CPF component of it as well. That also gets them ready in the future. Let's say once they finish and they go to work, and then eventually they want to buy a house, start a family, there is a base. So we're looking at the average of at the medium of $1,600 for a start for this group of people. Because from my personal observation as an NS man, people who are in my team, a lot of them make additional sacrifices beyond the call of duty. So for example, people who have very young children at home decided that they will continue to serve even is within because the NS allows, if you are within the first 6 months, you have a young child at home, you can ask for deferment. But a lot of them choose not to defer, continue to serve. Some of them are living very far away. Camps usually it's like some ulu places, Sungai Gedong and stuff like that. So they have to either travel very early from their house to the camp, leaving the house maybe 5:30 to reach the camp at 8, or they have to take a cab, and that's at their own expense. So all these are the sacrifices that people don't see of our NS men. So I think that for a start, let's give them that fair compensation and also the kind of respect and the treatment that they deserve. Yeah.
And our NSFs also come from all walks of life, right? Not all of them are just leaving schooling, right? And then going on to higher education. Many of them have been in the workforce for several years already. They might even be their family's sole breadwinners. They might be the sandwich generation looking after their elderly parents who may not be able to work, and also maybe they may be young parents themselves as well. And some of them, you're really plucking them out of the workforce in their prime earning years when they're fit, and a lot of them will be doing labourers' jobs, right? And their allowance is basically half of what they could be making outside, or even more, even worse. So you're taking them out, you're not letting them work, and then you're also paying them a pittance, and they need to support their families. So I really think we should respect the sacrifices made by our NSFs.
And that brings us to the end of our Hammer Show series. I hope you'll give us a chance to be able to bring some of these topics up in Parliament.
Cut! Hey, that's a wrap.
Any
Long day.
I know. Do you have enough? How long are we talking for? Oh, quite long.
Half an hour more. Half an hour more. Yeah.
Okay.
That's enough to
about
cut.
the NS.